Welcome to Chills with Chas. We'll be continuing the Haunted Heartland series with the stories Doug Hill and the Boger from the Ghosts of Egypt section. Let's get into it. The most notorious ghost in southern Illinois haunts a road cut through a hill about 5 miles west of Jonesboro on State Highway 146. The Doug Hill Road was constructed by early residents so they could drive more easily to a Mississippi River landing only a few miles distant. Details vary on how the area became haunted. Most old-timers agree that a Civil War-era incident may account for the ghostly legends, but few agree on the details. One common story maintains that a provost marshal named Welch was ambushed and murdered near Doug Hill by Union Army deserters sometime in 1865. There are two versions of the Welch story, each similar in many respects, but vary in the number of deserters plotting revenge against the marshal. In the first account, Welch arrested 2 or 3 deserters and turned them into the Army authorities in nearby Jonesboro. But the garrison received word that a peace treaty was signed a few days earlier at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. The men were released. On his way home that evening, Welch had to pass through Doug Hill. The deserters lay in ambush for their captor, and when he rode by, shot him through the head. Authorities later found his body. His horse was tied nearby. No one was ever apprehended for the murder, but soon thereafter people in the neighborhood began seeing Welch's ghost. The second story varies, and a dozen deserters formed a plot against Welch, who had arrested them at one time or another for desertion during the Civil War. One of the plotters befriended Welch and rode with him towards Doug Hill to make sure he would pass the spot where his co-conspirators lay in ambush. Another of the men loaded all but 2 rifles with blank cartridges. The bushwhackers selected the guns at random, and Welch neared the point of ambush. His friend made an excuse to leave, and Welch rode on. He was cut down as he passed through Doug Hill, below some bushes in which the men had hidden. But while the details of the Doug Hill Road's background vary, the fact that the road is haunted has never been questioned. In fact, one night, many years ago, a wagoner was passing Doug Hill when he saw a body laying in the road. He pulled his horses to a halt and leaped out. When he knelt down to lift the stranger, his arm went right through the stranger's body. The wagoner backed up a few paces, scratched his head, and closed his eyes. After he opened them, he could see that the body was still in the road. Again he tried to lift the body, but again he touched only the road where the corpse appeared to be resting. By this time the man was scared nearly senseless, and the wagon rushed forward. He could feel the wheels thump over the body. He never looked back. Another legend centered upon Doug Hill, has the ghost driving a wagon in a most peculiar manner. The following account was given some years ago to folklorist Chris Neely by John H. Terrace, who lived in nearby Jonesboro. A fellow by the name of Bill Smith ain't just exactly in his right mind. He's sort of half idiot, I guess. He's still a livin' at Jonesboro, and you might see him on the street. If you'd ask him about it, he'd tell you the same thing I'm telling you if he talks to you. Bill was a haulin' off corn one day. It's been a long time ago. He'd hauled off 3 loads of corn that day and was going home after dark. He had to pass through Dug Hill where he lived in the bottoms. He just about got halfway down the hill, going west, when the neck yoke of one of his horses came off, and Bill had to stop the wagon right there on the grade and get out to fix the yoke. The ground was froze hard, for it was in December when he was hauling the corn off, and the wagon that come over the roads done a heap of rattling on account of the shape they was in. He could hear the wagon comin' a long way off. As Bill was down there a-fixin' the yoke, he yearned the awfulest racket a man ever did ear. It sounded like some drunk man a-drivin' an empty wagon over the road as fast as the horses could go. Bill thought maybe it was one of his buddies that was a-haulin' off corn with him, comin' home drunk. It scared Bill to death nearly, for he knowed that there wasn't enough room for the wagon to get by on account of the road being so narrow, and Bill knowed he couldn't get out of the way. It looked like him and his horse might get killed. Bill looked back up the hill and hollered as loud as he could, but it didn't do no good. The racket kept getting nearer and nearer. Bill didn't know what to do. He knowed that the driver couldn't stop the wagon in time. The noise was on the brink of the hill. Bill looked up and realized that the noise of the wagon was in the air above him and not on the road a-tail. Bill looked up in the air, and he seemed comin' over the crest of the hill a heavy pair of black horses a-pullin' a heavy wagon with sideboards. A man was a-sittin' in the wagon a-drivin'. The horses were a-runnin' up there in the air, just like they were on the ground, and the wheels on the wagon was a-turnin' just like they was on the ground, and the wagon was making an awful lot of racket, like a wagon does when it drives over rough frozen ground. The wagon and team pulled right over Bill's head and stuck the crest of another hill, and Bill couldn't see it any more, but he heard the noise of the wagon after it had got 2 miles away. Alright, and on to the next story, the Boger. In southern Illinois, the boogeyman is known as the Boger or Boogerman. The character is heard but seldom seen, and is usually used to quiet obstinate children, as in, the Boogerman will get you if you don't watch out. One of the few times the Boger had shown itself is revealed in this tale. It was twilight when Frank Corzine passed through Dug Hill on the way to fetch old Doc Russell. Corzine's wife was sick with Corlia. I don't know. You can read, I guess. As he neared the crest, of the hill. He saw the figure of a giant of a man walking some 30 yards behind him. Suddenly the hulking figure was a few feet behind Corzin and stayed there. Corzin spurred his horse, who needed very little prodding, and raced off the way to Doc Russell's house, some 30 yards down the road. Corzin was breathless and pale as he dismounted at Russell's door. The doctor emerged from the house and asked Corzin what had happened. He saw that the horse was trembling and shaking as if it had been ridden hard or scared. Corzin haughtily told of his encounter with the Boger. Such to his surprise, the doctor said yes, he too had seen the Boger man only a few nights before, and went on to describe the very same figure Corzin had encountered, a very large man between 9 and 11 feet tall, wearing black pants, a white shirt, and a scarf draped around his neck. Doctor told Corzin that he couldn't come to see his wife that night. He was too scared of the Boger. Dr. Russell did rouse some neighbors to accompany Corzin back home. The Boger didn't show himself again. At least that night he didn't. Alright, that'll be the end of those stories. I'll be back for the next ones. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.